Killeen, Texas, a quiet working-class military town. Home to Fort Hood, one of the largest U.S. Army bases in the world. Life here moved at a slow, steady rhythm. The kind of place where people raised families, worked hard all week, and spent Sundays in church. But on October 16, 1991, that rhythm was shattered forever. A gunman drove his truck into a crowded cafeteria and unleashed one of the most horrifying mass shootings in American history. So what drives a man to commit mass murder? And why did the media and the public move on so quickly? And how did one woman's unimaginable loss change Texas gun laws forever? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
George Pierre Hennard was born on October 15, 1956. The son of a Swiss-born surgeon and a homemaker, he grew up in an upper-middle-class home, first in Pennsylvania, then New Mexico, and eventually Texas. He wasn't poor, he wasn't abused, but something was off. From childhood, George Hennard carried a grudge against the world. He was antisocial, explosive, and deeply paranoid. He couldn't keep friends, couldn't hold a job, and had an especially deep hatred for women. In 1989, he was discharged from the Merchant Marine for drug use and insubordination. Co-workers called him moody and combative. He began sending rambling, hateful letters to local women, called them vipers, accused them of being spoiled, stuck-up bitches. He blamed women for his loneliness and his failures in life. In one letter, he ranted, "I will prevail over the female vipers in this world. I will make you pay for the damage you had caused me." His neighbors called him dangerous. Women in town said they were terrified of him. He told one of his friends that Killeen was full of women he wanted to get even with. In the months leading up to the massacre, Hennard legally purchased 2 pistols, a Glock 17 and a Ruger P89. He also practiced regularly at the firing range. Then, on the morning of October 16, 1991, he wrote a final note. "All women are vipers. This is what Bell County did to me. I will get even." He loaded his truck and headed to Luby's Cafeteria. October 16th was Boss's Day. The one-time rush at Luby's Cafeteria in Killeen, Texas, was in full swing. Over 150 people packed the building. Co-workers celebrating, families eating together, veterans grabbing a bite. Then, at 12:39 p.m., George Hennard's blue Ford Ranger smashed through the plate glass window. It tore into the dining room, scattering tables, chairs, and stunned customers. Some thought it was an accident. A few people even moved to help. Then Hennard stepped out of the cab. He was calm, focused, and without a word, he opened fire. He shot the first man who approached him, then turned to a woman at the salad bar, then another and another. People screamed. Chaos erupted. Some dove beneath tables. Others tried to run. But there was only one public exit, and it was blocked. Witnesses say Hennard moved methodically, like he was working a plan. He passed by wounded victims. He reloaded, and he kept shooting. He specifically targeted women, calling them bitches, vipers, and whores, as he pulled the trigger. Men were often ignored, unless they got in his way. Susanna Hupp was sitting with her parents, Al and Ursula, when the gunfire began. She instinctively reached for her .38 revolver, but then horrifically realized it was locked in her car, because at that time, Texas law made it a crime to carry a handgun into a public place like Luby's. As the chaos erupted, her father tried to charge the gunman. He was gunned down instantly. Susanna then turned to her mother and said, "We've got to get out of here." She made her way to a broken window and jumped out, but when she turned back, her mother wasn't behind her. Ursula had stayed. She crawled to Al's lifeless body, cradling his head in her arms. And that's when George Hennard walked up and shot her in the back of the head. Susanna ran to the front of the building, screaming for the police officers to go in. But police held their positions, unsure of how many shooters were inside, or whether they were walking into a hostage situation, or if explosives were involved. Inside, the killing continued. Hennard moved through the rooms, reloading and executing. Finally, after nearly 10 minutes of carnage, police began to move in. They exchanged gunfire with Hennard, forcing him to retreat toward a restroom at the back of the building. Wounded and cornered, he sat down against a wall and ended it himself with a single shot to the head. 12 minutes total. That's all it took to make Luby's Cafeteria the site of the deadliest mass shooting in American history at the time. And yet, outside of Texas, it barely left a mark on the national conscience. When the gunfire stopped, 23 people were dead, dozens more wounded, and the small town of Killeen, Texas was left in shock. The headlines called it senseless. The media moved on in days. But for survivors like Susanna Hupp, it was anything but senseless. She lost both her parents that day, and she blamed herself, not because she failed to act, but because she obeyed the law. She stated, "I reached for my purse, but then I remembered. My gun was in the car, because I was a law-abiding citizen." At the time, Texas didn't allow concealed carry. It didn't allow open carry either. Despite its gun-toting image, Texas had one of the strictest handgun carry laws in the country. Laws that dated all the way back to the post-Civil War era. In the aftermath of the Civil War, Texas, like many southern states, passed gun laws designed to disarm freed slaves and political dissenters. Openly carrying handguns in public was criminalized, and those restrictions remained on the books for over a century. By 1991, you could own a gun in Texas, but you couldn't carry, not openly, not concealed, not for protection. Susanna Hupp became an unlikely activist. A chiropractor and trauma survivor turned Second Amendment crusader. She began testifying before state legislators and eventually Congress. People like to say, "Well, I don't want a bunch of guns in restaurants." Well, guess what? The lunatics don't care about your laws. Only the law-abiding get punished. What happened at Luby's became a turning point. Gun control didn't stop George Hennard, and many believe the tragedy proved one thing: a good person with a gun might have. Susanna Hupp never forgot the day she watched her parents die. And she made sure the state of Texas wouldn't forget either. She stated, the only thing that stopped him was his own bullet. That should never happen again. You'd think the deadliest mass shooting in American history at the time would be etched into the nation's memory. But the truth is, outside of Texas, most people barely remember it. There were no viral videos, no 24/7 news cycles, just a cafeteria full of blood and silence. In the years that followed, Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, and Las Vegas became national inflection points. Each one was followed by a wave of outrage, calls for gun bans, and a media cycle ready to blame guns, culture, or ideology. But Luby's? It disappeared from the national stage as fast as it happened. Why? Because this wasn't a story the media could use. There was no assault rifle, no hate group affiliation, just one disturbed man in a room full of law-abiding citizens who weren't legally allowed to carry firearms. And when the survivors spoke out, not to ban guns, but to demand the right to carry them, the cameras turned off. But this tragedy didn't lead to more restrictions. It led to greater freedom. Texas passed House Bill 1776, legalizing concealed carry and shifting power back to the people. Susanna Hupp, who had left her gun in the car to follow the law, became a legislator and helped rewrite those very laws. That wasn't the narrative the national press wanted, so they buried it. But survivors remember. The families in Killeen never forgot. The scars are still there. So is the memory of what happened and what could have stopped it. The Luby's Massacre became a rallying cry for self-defense and the Second Amendment. Not because of what the government did, but because of what it failed to do.
I didn't grow up in a house with guns. I don't hunt. I personally abhor hunting. But I was given a gun by a friend when I was 21 to carry in my purse for self-defense, and I was taught how to use it. A couple of years ago, my parents and I went to a cafeteria in Texas on a bright sunny day. We weren't in a dark alley where we weren't supposed to be. And as you all know the story, this madman drove his truck through the window. And he began shooting. Well, immediately, my father and I got down on the floor and put the table up in front of us. And this guy kept shooting. And you're thinking, what could it be? Is it a robbery? That's the first thing that generally comes to mind. And he keeps shooting. It took me a good 45 seconds to realize that this man wasn't there to commit a robbery. He wasn't there for a hit. He was there to simply shoot as many people as he possibly could. Now, I'd like to make something clear. I hear all this talk about how many bullets can go in a clip. I've been there. I can tell you it doesn't matter. It takes 1 second to switch out a clip. You can have 1 bullet or 100 bullets. It doesn't matter, guys. I've been there. He goes, dump, dump. Just like that. That's not enough time to rush a man. I promise you. When I finally realized what was occurring, I thought, I got him. And I reached for my purse. He was maybe 12 feet away. Is it possible my gun could have jammed? Sure. Is it possible I could have missed? Sure. But I can tell you I've hit much smaller targets at much greater distances. But then I realized that a couple of months earlier I had made the stupidest decision of my life. I took my gun out of my purse and left it in my car. Because as you well know, in the state of Texas, it's sometimes a felony offense to carry a gun in your purse. I can tell you that I'm not mad at the guy that did this. As he continued, it was obvious that he was a madman. My father, at that point, said, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. He's going to kill everybody in here. And he rushed the man. No way. This guy turned, shot him in the chest. He went down, was obviously mortally wounded. For whatever reason, that made the man change directions and go off to my left. Shortly thereafter, someone at the back of the restaurant broke out a window. When I saw what looked like an opportunity to escape, I turned around and I grabbed my mother by the shirt and I said, come on, we've got to run, we've got to get out of here. And then my feet grew wings and I was out the back window. As soon as I got out, I realized that my mother had not followed me out. And as I learned from the police officers, she had crawled over to where my father was and cradled him until the guy got back around to her, put the gun to her head. She looked up at him, put her head down, and he pulled the trigger. My parents had just had their 47th wedding anniversary. She wasn't going anywhere. As I mentioned, I'm not really mad at the guy that did this. And I'm certainly not mad at the guns that did this. They didn't walk in there by themselves and pull their own triggers. The guy that did it was a lunatic. That's like being mad at a rabid dog. I'm mad at my legislators for legislating me out of the right to protect myself and my family. I would much rather be sitting in jail with a felony offense on my head and have my parents alive. The Second Amendment is not about duck hunting. And I know I'm not going to make very many friends saying this, but it's about our right, all of our rights, to be able to protect ourselves from all of you guys up there.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or show ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.